Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Whispers of the Deep. My name is Draken. Today we're going over Chapter 5, Lucian 2. So, whereas the previous chapter, Ekin 1, took place at the Siege of Green Navria, Lucian 2 takes place back in the main locus of our point of views, which is currently in Ardonia with Iroh, Fortuna, and Lucian. This chapter, in particular, to give a brief rundown, is a dinner with Lucian, his family, his guests, and the things that happen. In this chapter, we learn more about Lucian's family, namely the introduction of Lucian's sister, Canta. We also learn more about Edmund as a character, and we also get some more lore on recent history. We also have Egenhand recruiting Iroh for something. So this chapter has a lot going on, and it has been one of my favorites so far. And without any further ado, let's begin with the epigraph. So this epigraph is from the Poems of the Chileans, translated by the Lady Melissa Higathon, which tells us that the language of the Chileans and the current language of the Empire in Noria are not the same. This poem reveals how Fair Calais, in its current rendition, was founded by some guy named Origin, who slew his foe Argyle and birthed lines of royalty, likely eight, for the eight clans and the eight spires of Fair Clay, which we learned about. And also, the idea with sacrifice, we make your legend grow, implies a sort of militant, quasi-spiritual expansionism that was carried from the Chileans into the Empire in Noria. And with the windstorm, we get the idea, and at the beginning of this chapter, we get the idea that Lucian's house is not in order. The places are out of placemat. The places at the seats are not in order. The chairs aren't in order. Lucian does not have control over the people who are at his table. And we have this very traditionally Roman description of a meal. We have starting with eggs, from the eggs to the apples being a Latin phrase. We have salad. We have a chicken stewed with various types of alliums and vinegar. We have milk porridge. We have applesauce. We have garum, essentially fermented fish sauce, and we have watered wine. And then we have a very detailed description of the different people around Lucian's table, so we know exactly who's facing who and things like that. There was a small edit in between doing the recording for this chapter and doing the going over is the changing of six, from 10 and 2 to 6, because there are 12 household guards of the Marulai. Six are currently at Castle Ravencroft, the other six being with Lord Casimir Marula. Um, to expand upon that, in Lucian 1, it mentions how there are 2 from 20 table seats set out, and to change to match with the continuity, that number is reduced from 2 and 20 to 10 and 4. So we also get the introduction of Sir Miles Verid, who is Meg's father, and also Brother Preston at the castle's rook, who would like to take their meals alone, which says something about their character. Um, Edmund says, oh, Edmund has this very like rustic agrarianism of the joys of rustic cooking, and then which is contrasted against the high spice, high camp, high decadence, quote unquote, of the capital. And Lucian, however, notes that Edmund is speaking in High Norian, which is like the language of the court, as opposed to Low Norian, which is the language of the people. And Lucian is in fact speaking in Low Norian for the benefit of Tatian, who is there as a guest of honor, which is funny because there are already guests of honor, namely Egenhand, who's a member of the Red Gold Council, and Edmund, who is a prince, and Iroh, who's Lucian's brother, who he did not expect to come. So Tatian, however, does not recognize who Edmund is. So the official leadership of Erdonia is that the Adonites rule Erdonia, from which the region gets its name. However, the Adonites are more or less absentee because they're in control of the empire through Procni Adon, which means the actual governance of Erdonia has been left to the Murulite, as we see in Iroh 1 and the subsequent chapters, which means that Tatian is familiar with the Murulai as the current governors. However, he also would not recognize Edmund generally because the Aid Knights themselves have not been present for a while. And sure, Tatian is an old man, but Edmund hasn't been around, and Tatian also hasn't been informed who Edmund and Egenhand have been yet. So Egenhand replies that this is Prince Edmund, son of the living Saint Tychon which is one of the Emperor's titles, fourth in line to the throne. So Tychon has four children. He has Uther, Adrastea, Tychon II, and Edmund, and that is the order of succession. And they are 12, 11, 10, and 24. So, as Edmund brings up later in the chapter, Edmund, although he is double the age of each of his siblings, is fourth in line to the throne. And he says this doesn't bother him. So, however, we get this idea that when I say living saint, it really is some kind of religious thing like that, where Tatian gets forward and does proskinesis, which in the ancient world is this thing where, towards the Persian emperor, the king of kings, a person would basically put themselves face first onto the floor, as low down as they could possibly. And Tatian has essentially done this. He's poured himself onto the floor and then kisses Edmund's hand when Edmund gave him a hand to help him up. And for a moment, Iroh and Egenhand's glances met. A recurring thing in this chapter is that various people, Iroh and Egenhand, Iroh and Fortuna, have their glances meet, and Lucien does not know what they're saying, what idea is going on between them. In fact, a recurring motif in Lucien's chapters is that Lucien is very bad at reading subliminal hints between people, and that although he's smart, although he's able to get to the center of a matter, such as like with the matter of the two farmers, he's not very good at picking up on incredibly subtle hints. He's good at analyzing data when the data is put before him, but he's not able to get these smaller, finer details, which definitely has some ability on some impact on his ability to administrate in some way or another. So we have we have the reactions that Iroh and Ekin simply acknowledge this immense show of deference to the political order. Fortuna shakes their head because they are more or less disgusted by this show of fealty, and Kanta's eyes narrow. Kanta is not built the same as Iroh and Lucien, and this will come across in future chapters as well. That whereas Iroh is someone who's interested in political power, and Lucien is someone who wants to wield political power for good, Kanta's goals might or might not be less ideal or personalized, shall we say. So Kanta is 17, and Kanta is wearing black and gold. Duly noted. However, she looks like Iroh in a way that Lucien doesn't. She has Iroh's straight black hair as opposed to Lucien's wavy black hair, and she has his same dark eyes, darker than Lucien's own. So there's a slight difference of like coloration and pigmentation. Iroh and Kanta look more, well, Iroh and Lucien look more like siblings. Iroh and Lucien can't all look like siblings, but Kanta looks more like Iroh than Lucien. And in fact, Lucien notes this, and then Edmund gives a small poetic zinger, rise as the shoots of spring's first flowers, and Tatian says, "Your worship," which is, we really are selling this whole God King type thing, aren't we? So Edmund then says, "You treat me as one born to royalty," and he seems satisfied by this. And then Tatian says, "In fact, does it upset you that I'm treating you as someone born to royalty?" And Edmund says, "No, I like it," which is this is the beginning of the idea that Edmund is actually someone who, although he says later that he doesn't care too much about being royalty, the little things of appreciating having someone do proskinesis to him, to saying he enjoys being the royalty, he's really speaking out of both ends of his mouth. And we get the idea that his actions truly say that his actions show that he's someone who is accustomed to royalty and accustomed to his new station. But he outwardly professes that he doesn't care about it, which, based off of this chapter, really seems to be not true. So we have lore about his Lord Father, Jason Adon, and his late brother, Jason Adon, Jason II. And we have until Serene Sortira, with Sortira being the angel of death or the goddess of death. And then we have the Tetramachi, which is literally the Mache battle of Tetra, a four-way battle, um, in some ways historically based off of the year of the four emperors. In fact, one of the emperors of the year of four emperors is called Otho, with the others being Galba, Vitellius, and Vespasian, the one who actually won. So we have this lore. So there was a previous dynasty, which was the second Melanthinid dynasty, and there was Kaiso. So there was Arsenion, the king, Arsenion, the emperor of the Empire in Noria, and then he had a son named Leokos. And Leokos and Arsenion are killed by Kaiso. Kaiso then takes over the empire from his family, however, is then deposed by a despot, which is essentially like a secular leader named Sarpedon Vix, or Sarpedon Stonetooth, as he's called. And Sarpedon, in fact, sends Kaiso sending down the sky, which is the river which runs through Fair Calais, in a wooden box, which is sort of a mirror of the ancient Roman practice to what you do to parasites or things of that sort, which is that you sew them into a leather bag with a bunch of wild animals and send them floating down the Tiber. But um, uh, we then have Sarpedon is only lasts another 2 months before the other nobles exile him, and then we have boom, bida bam, bida bam, we have a four-way civil war between Kaiso, or at least someone claiming to be Kaiso. We have Kaiso's widow, because they aren't aligned, suggests that Kaiso's widow Melita doesn't believe that the Kaiso is a real one, and then we have Sarpedon, and then we have the establishment, which is Tychon Otho, and backed by Procneadon. And then we learn that the war takes a year, and Tychon the Othorid sets uncontested, and the marriage happens sometime during the war. And the brother is slain atop Tegia's hill, which is some battle. Out of it's the union, the date of Melita's death is Tegia's hill. So Tegia's hill was some battle or some catastrophe which resulted in the death of one of the four claimants to the throne, but also resulted in the death of 1,000 innocent people. We don't know what it is yet. Um, so even to my parents' union, the day of Melita's death goes well poorly, and this means like on the one hand, it's a happy day because Melita died. On the other hand, my brother died, and he would have been heir to the throne at the time of the marriage. So it is a happy day and a sad day at the same time. And then Kanta, who is incredibly monotone, basically Kanta seems really removed and detached and kind of checked out of things compared to all the other characters. But she speaks up and says he means that the sacrifice was worth it, 1,000 innocents for one usurper, a fitting price. And when Kenta says a fitting price, some might say, what they're really saying is, I would think it's a fitting price to kill 1,000 innocent people to deal with one political enemy. And Edmund does not take kindly to that because Kenta is, by saying some might say, is putting those words into Edmund's mouth. And Kenta says, life's value changes to one bearing tragedy's custom, which essentially means that one bearing tragedy's custom is someone someone who has a lot of bad things happen to them. And if life's value changes, that means to someone who has a lot of bad things happen to them, life is either more valuable or less valuable, one of the two. And a lesson the Aidenites will know well. Hell, this is because the Aidenites are historically unlucky slash cursed family. However, Kanta says that this is a lesson both the Aidenites know well because they themselves have their own historic, basically, curse in their bloodline, but also the idea that the state is accustomed to great tragedies, that the state hungers for men, gold, and martyrs. The state uses martyrs to achieve their goals. They need gold to pay soldiers, and they need men to die in their wars. And Kanta is just being incredibly blunt, essentially saying that, oh, yeah, no, political entities always need just a massive quantity of lives and money to get things done, or namely, in terms of war, is an incredibly blunt, incredibly cynical way of thinking, incredibly cynical way of looking at things. But she's not wrong. So, and Lucien does not like this because this is Kanta is speaking in front of the prince and one of the most powerful members of the government, although we don't know what Egenhand does exactly. So she then turns to Tatian and says how many years has been since the wagon bearing 88 silvers have begun going to Fair Calais. 10 and 3, which is the same number of time since the war began. So this then puts into question the causality of the war. Was it the war began because of the money, or was it that the war began and then the money was found? And Edmund says, yes, they did marry because she was rich and he needed the money to win the war. but he then downplays that and says it would only last he have only lasted another season, which seems really false if he's willing to marry for the wealth. But then also says, oh no, it wasn't just the wealth. They went for a station because they're both old families, for prestige because they're both old families, and for love, which this all seems incredibly contrived. Not going to lie. And then my father's called my mother's into fatigue over respect. Has it really been so good a match? This seems like just straight propaganda. And then three heirs as many years. That does not tell us that they were in love. That just simply tells us that they were trying to make heirs very, very frequently. And I had ought to accustom myself to Prince, for God's willing remain one evermore. And we've already established in the chapter that Edmund really likes being royalty, but he's fine being prince. So this is either he wants to benefit from this political system, which has put him on top without actually having the obligations of being royalty, or he actually does desire greater political station, the empire, but is trying to play that down. And then we have Edmund take the lyre, which is mentioned in Lucian 1, off the plaque and starts playing it. However, the lyre is horribly out of tune, which is funny because Edmund's supposed to be a good musician, but also the lyre is not obeying him. However, the person's laughing. Realistically, the person's Meg, most likely. However, Lucian is watching Stoneface because Lucian himself is embarrassed and is trying to not think about the fact that he's embarrassed. And he's embarrassed because he put the lyre on the wall and the lyre was useless because it was out of tune. So it looks bad on him. His house is not in order. And then Edmund talks about his ancestors and their tragedy, which is a whole thing, but is not relevant to this chapter right now. And then as Edmund sings, Lucian looks around at the people who he's around. And we have Iroh, this very evocative description of Iroh's long black mane being a waterfall running deep beneath the earth, with manes being something that lions have, and the depths of the earth and water beneath the earth, making us think of the prologue. So this is a question of like, what kind of influence is Iroh under? Is there some kind of influence or association there with the things from the prologue, which maybe not. We'll see. And then Lucian, this is a central question, which is that how much can someone change without being the same person, or how much can a thing change without being the same person, which is the ship of Theseus paradox. And then we have the comparison where Fortuna has become the person they were always meant to be, and Fortuna is assigned female birth, non-binary presenting, and is wearing a rainbow robe, which is just a little bit of a wink and a nudge thing, but also inlaid with bronze leaves. So you imagine that Kenta is wearing like leaves on her body, but Fortuna's leaves, bronze, are meant to look like scales. That sorry, Kenta's wearing feathers, but Fortuna's wearing leaves. So even though Fortuna's not wearing armor, Fortuna is still wearing armor of a kind. And Edmund is also bigger now, and Kanta is someone who knows much of ruling, but little of ruling well, essentially. So Lucian, this begins this real question, which will be in the next several chapters of what kind of we've already discussed what kind of administrator Lucian would be, but if something were to happen to Lucian, what kind of administrator would Kanta be? And Lucian, in fact, questions how well he's done things. And he says, hopefully I've done things well, but he doesn't realistically know if he's actually made his mandate a better place. So Fortuna now goes off, basically. Fortuna, we've already established, is someone who has a very different set of morals than many of the other characters in the story, even beyond Lucian. And Fortuna basically just says, oh yes, to think the same forces which moved our ancestors yet exert their wills today, which is a very central theme of the work. However, I say the thing about both your families, which is the Authorids and the Aedonites. And Fortuna essentially says that, well, we got rid of slavery 600 years ago when the empire was formed, but we still have slavery because there are wage slaves in the cities and serfs in the fields. So it's not different. And this is an incredibly pointed, incredibly both fighting words, essentially. Fortuna is picking a fight, and Fortuna is drinking a lot of wine, so maybe they're getting intoxicated, but they are picking a fight with Edmund and saying, I don't like the current economic system we're under, and I think it's fucked up, and you're benefiting from it, and that makes you a bad person. And for Lucian doesn't know what to say about this. But also another idea is that there was this old specter which we thought we got rid of, but we did not, and it's coming back, or it never left. And Iroh tries to cover Fortuna because Iroh still has feelings for Fortuna, but besides that, they're childhood friends, and says, Fortuna's discussing history. Rooks discuss history all the time. It's the same. And this is kind of a false equivalency, but not really. So, um, Edmund also tries to play it off, saying, "Oh, you speak your mind. In the capital, people don't speak their mind. Thank you for speaking your mind, but that, and I'm not used to people speaking their mind to me," which is Edmund's playing it off. So, and finally, Fortuna says, "Thank you, Your Highness," as opposed to Prince or Edmund. Fortuna is now finally acknowledging Edmund's proper station. And then Eggenhand speaks a lot. When Eggenhand speaks, it's often double entendre. And here we have the first real instance of that. He says, Eggenhand basically says to Fortuna, no, 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 you're right. But he says, truly, to become Lord of the Earth, which we've already established, is one of the titles of Tygon Otho. It requires the resources of many. It requires life, spirit, knowledge, and mastery of all things. So, Eggenhand is saying, yes, you were right. On the one hand, the only reason we have emperors is because of the exploitation of other people in society, of serfs, of people in the cities, of the extraction of taxes and wealth and the prosecution of war. That's all right, but it's not a bad thing. He says, "Oh no, is quite like almost remarkable that we're able to pool these resources together to create emperors or to create empires," which is Fortuna understands this. Lucian doesn't. This goes over Lucian's head, but Fortuna is like, what? No, that's fucked, essentially. And truly to become Lord of the Earth requires the resources of many. It requires life, spirit, knowledge, mastery of all things, which mirrors the talk of martyrs and gold earlier. Egenhand has been paying attention. And now now that Egenhand has entered the arena of discourse, Iroh has challenged, what knowledge did you seek when we last crossed paths at Eastern Rookery? Not every day has a member of the Red Gold arrived unannounced, which is calling to question two things. One, Iroh and Egenhand met in the past. Why was Egenhand a member of the Red Gold who's master of the Imperial household? Why did he need to go to the Eastern Rookery? But similarly, this is the second time now that Iroh has supposedly run into Egenhand by chance. It's like if I had a nickel for every time this happened, I only have two nickels, but strange that it happened twice. So Iroh is basically saying, what's going on? This is incredibly suspicious. And Egenhand says, those in my line of work are accustomed to knowing much and revealing little, which is this is a sort of like occultist Gnostic kind of thing. And Egenhand is saying that I know a lot and I'm not going to tell you. But only in this way can the empire be preserved. That only in this way, if certain people know much but reveal little, can the empire be preserved. 2 from 20 are my superiors on the red gold. I leave to them the prosecution of war, the verbosity of state, the pursuit of truth. So this says Egenhand is saying that I am not concerned with political administration. I'm not concerned with war, and I'm not concerned with whether if what any of I'm saying is actually real. But if the imperial household cannot sleep well at night, its heads are moot. But compared to my series, I am of little consequence. And this should be sending off tons and tons of red flags in your head. So the master of the imperial household is essentially the person who's responsible for the day-to-day operations of the royal palace, Argent's Hall. But the imperial household, Egenhand might instead be talking about the entire empire, that if the entire empire cannot sleep well at night, its heads are moot, which means if the entire empire, so the imperial household, besides for the actual building of the royal palace, it could also mean the family of the emperor, but also could mean the entire empire. Essentially, Lucian is saying, sorry, no, Egenhand is saying if they cannot sleep well at night, it doesn't matter who's in charge. So this means that Egenhand helps people sleep well at night, but is this like making sure the beds are met, or is this like removing threats to the Empire by means that don't involve truth or war or statecraft? We don't know, but Egenhand does, and he's essentially revealing that his job is way, way, way more important than it's on paper, and he's not going to tell us why. But we do get the idea that if he's someone who's not concerned with statecraft or truth, but is involved with dealing with the Empire's threats, it sounds like Egenhand is some kind of spy master, actually, or has some kind of covert job within the Imperial administration. And then compared to my superiors, who are his superiors exactly? He's already said that if I don't do my job, it doesn't matter who. If I don't do my job, it's not important who's the head of state. But he says compared to my superiors, the heads of state who he just said aren't important, I'm of little consequence. So clearly, Egenhand knows something we don't, and is not telling us about it. And he says, I am of little consequence, which should evoke the I'm someone of little consequence or someone of no consequence, which Corpse Hand says in the prologue, which puts a link between the two characters. And Iroh says, yes, you're of little consequence, but you're still a man of many capabilities. Iroh's picking up on whatever Egenhand's saying. And Egenhand bites something red and then says, encounters says, why were you training at the Alabastron or Eastern Rookery, which is to become a rook, or like but we know it's actually to gain some kind of political power, gain power. That Iroh was at the rookery. Iroh looks over his shoulder and tosses the amulet on a chain, which is his medallion, which is the one we know about. We still have the other amulet we don't know about yet, and we have a recitation of Iroh's skills, which are language, rhetoric, history, medicine, and healing. So if Egenhand has shown up at the Eastern Rookery possibly to see Iroh, and then has come to Castle Ravencroft, and Iroh's coincidentally there. It seems Egenhand is interested in Iroh's skills. In fact, Egenhand says, "You should work for me." So it means that these skill, and if that's the case, if Egenhand has found out Iroh and asked for him to work for him, it means that these skills are important. So the question is like, what do these skills have in common? What does knowing different languages, knowing how to convince people, knowing the history of various political things, knowing how to knowing the art of healing and knowing the art of medicine or like surgery, what do all these things have in common? And if you understand that, you might understand what Egenhand is getting at. And it's revealed Iroh hasn't continued his didn't complete his initiation, and Lucien is really upset about this because if he had known their mother Shoshana had meant so much to Iroh, he would have called for him earlier, or rather have sent for him when Shoshana was dying, rather than let Iroh figure out on his own, or sent word to him after Iroh died, after Shoshana died. And then he has a small whispering voice which says you wouldn't have because you wanted him to keep studying. And then Egenhand says, "Is a long way to Fairclay? Do you plan on like there's some poetry, but essentially it's a long way, and you might not get there on time. And why not work for me instead? Because if you don't arrive there on time, you're not going to be able to finish your initiation, and you're fucked." And Iroh Fortuna's gaze is met. So here we have a very interesting question. I'll lay it out. This will be continually referenced in some of the future chapters, which is we are told in Fortuna 1 that it took Iroh about 20 days to get from Fair Calais to Castle Ravencroft. He's one person traveling by himself. And Edmund and Egenhand are two people, and one of them's the prince, so presumably they're traveling with an entourage who's just not with them right now. How, if Iroh is riding quickly, 20 days there, 20 days back, or thereabouts, how does Egenhand know about the deal? Because presumably Egenhand and Edmund left before Iroh. So let's put it like this way. Egenhand and Edmund would have a chance of knowing about Iroh's deal if they left after Iroh. But if they left after Iroh, how did they arrive there on the same day as him? Conversely, if Egenhand and when Iroh is like riding at a reasonable pace across the land. Conversely, if Iroh, if Egghead and Edmund left before Iroh, how did they know about the deal? And Iroh and Fortuna have picked up on this and has gone completely over Lucian's head. So Egghead says, if you don't arrive back in time, you can work for me. And he says, your eyes, they're special, you're special. Um, and you with me, you will learn things that will shame even the rooks. So Iroh is being promised secret knowledge by Egghead, someone who knows much but reveals little. And Kanta has now picked up on this as well and says, you would serve directly under his eminence. And Iroh says, counting hogs, clothes, coins, and heads. How could I resist? Iroh being cheeky here. But essentially, everyone at the table has realized this except for, well, Lucian basically, which is Edmund is here for a reason. Whatever the reason is, it's probably not just to check up on Lucian, which means Lucian is probably going to be called away from Castle Ravencroft at some point. If Iroh is also called away to Castle Ravencroft from Castle Ravencroft to work for Egghead, that leaves Kanta in charge. And Kanta seems to be someone who wants to be in charge. Therefore, Kent is pushing Iroh to accept this deal. This also brings up another question. How did so how did Egghead and Edmund know that Iroh's heading to Castle Ravencroft? They would have heard word about Shoshana's death, about Iroh's intention to go back, about the deal Iroh gotten, and then would have had to have followed him or been already in the field, then hear about this, and then get to Castle Ravencroft on the same day, which seems all incredibly contrived. So, and Egghead has revealed he has secret knowledge. So the question is, how did this all happen? And this is a question which will be explored or at least alluded to in future chapters. So Iroh then talks about his memories of Fair Calais. Fair Calais is in a hot climate with the date palms and the 8 spires, which are, we see these are like giant stone towers essentially. And Shadow Alley within a cleft between two hills, the river, and looking up at the Ivory Heights of Argent's Tower, which is a reference to something. um, and then Egghead says, whoever said you would be in Fair Calais, so which completely changes everything else on its head. Sure, Iroh will be led away from Castle Ravencroft from Erdonia to serve Egghead, but if he's not going to be in Fair Calais, where the Imperial household is, where is he going to be? Is he going to be like gathering grain somewhere? It's unclear. Where does counting hogs, clothes, coins, and heads? Where is he doing that if not for Fair Calais? So this really suggests that, yes, Egghead is up to something that isn't just the upkeep of the actual palace. And then Egghead distracts from this by saying, why haven't you all wed? Which is the same question Edmund posed in the previous Lucian chapter. And Lucian looks down and sees nothing appetizing, bones and flabby skin and bits of wild lettuce, something he doesn't want to eat. He's incredibly self-conscious about this. And Kanta lays it out for us, which basically says, we haven't been given any political marriages yet because Casimir Mrula is looking to increase his political station until after the campaign is done. And this seems to satisfy Egghead. And then we get this question of what kind of person does each of the siblings want to marry, Fortuna included. And this reflects all in the different characters that Lucian wants someone who could help me. Lucian wants someone who could help him administrate. If I had to think, I would want someone who's intelligent, who knows both how to make decisions and keep to them, which is something that Lucian feels as if he doesn't do enough. That Lucian perhaps feels he's too soft of an administrator. Iroh wants a political marriage plain and simple, and is well versed on which people are eligible for such political marriages. In fact, bringing back Carla Megarion, who was seen in last chapter. And Edmund laughs at this and says, "You're haunted by some gloom-bearing vulture," which is this is one of many instances of this image of Iroh having a bird on his shoulder being in the description, which is a very particular image, which why is that there? Might be important. And then Fortuna says, I want to marry someone, if I was going to marry, I would want to marry someone who was just, essentially, who knew how others ought to be treated and the morals to do so. And Edmund thinks this is incredibly funny because Fortuna is describing Lucian. Fortuna is describing that they would want to marry someone like Lucian. which implies that Fortuna might have some kind of romantic connection to Lucien, which is also alluded to in Fortuna 1. And Kanta says, none of this. I want someone who is lively so they can do what I want, someone who's charismatic so they can get other people to do what they want, which is what I want, and someone who knows how to keep their nose out of other people's business, which means someone who isn't going to um look down on what I do. So this essentially means I want a lackey who will do exactly as I say and allow me to project force but not oversight. So this is a sort of authority. This shows the beginning of an authoritarian tendency inside of Kanta. And Edmund says my heart because Edmund and Kanta were formerly betrothed, and Kanta is describing someone who is not Edmund. So Edmund is pretending to be hurt by this. And then my sister embarrasses me. Lucien is really having enough with all this. And then we finally get Meg speaking. In fact, if you've noticed, everyone who isn't a member of the household guard, they all get a chance to speak at least once during the chapter, which is rather intentional. We get this description that Meg and Kanta look like twins, and in fact dressed up as the other when they were little. And Meg and Kanta are essentially kindred spirits, but whereas Kanta is quiet and pensive, Meg is bubbly and vivacious. So Meg giggles. I'm afraid Kanta would find such a seat boring. There's nothing fun in riding a horse you haven't broken yourself, which is like this will to domination, essentially, which is spooky. And then at that, Lucian's had enough. So he calls an amnia, which gives essentially meringue cookies, like usually flavored with apple, to the different people. And Edmund wants 3 because he's the prince, and Amnia says no. We live in a just society where everyone only gets 2, equality. And Edmund is like, you call me prince. And this really shows that Edmund is someone who is accustomed to royalty and not being given preferential treatment because of his royalty is really getting to him. And then once they put aside the need of eating and drinking, which is a phrase that shows up in Homeric literature a lot, and Egenhand wants to have a word with Eirol. What for, we don't know, but now Edmund wants to have a word with Eirol, Kanta, so with Eirol, Lucien, and Fortuna. And the other 2 men is interesting. This would imply that Fortuna, being a Detian, is considered among men, in some things at least, but Kanta is not allowed because Kanta's not a man. Or rather, this is an excuse. Edmund wants to talk with those 3 specifically, but not Kanta because she's not part of the conversation. And Egenhand and Kanta will talk. They seem to have a lot they might want to talk about. And Kanta asks Eirol to please tell her what's going on, and Eirol says no. And then Kanta says it's easy enough to know things in this castle, showing that Kanta is already someone who is thinking about more subterfuge and more sneaky ways of getting what she wants, which might come important later. That's all for now. Next time we are going to go over Fortuna 2, which is the actual discussion between Edmund, Lucien, Fortuna, and Eirol. And that's also rather fun. And we get to basically hear, compared to Lucien, who doesn't really have an eye for knowing what's going on, Fortuna very much has an eye for what's going on. So we get a different perspective on things. Anyways, that's all for now. Bye.